one of the reasons that both Heather and I are doing this, doing the section on discourse, is because there are lots of different approaches to thinking about discourse. And hopefully you'll get one or two of them, or perhaps more, from us this morning. I find it quite useful to think about discourse in two different ways, at two different levels. One being what James G. talks about, distinguishes between discourse with a capital D and discourse with a small d. And I use a sort of similar sort of distinction. Discourse is providing concepts, values and positions, resources for people to use in order to act in the world. And what I'm interested in is how those resources structure what people do, what possibilities and constraints they provide for people. At the level of discourse with a little d, the deployment of those resources and in the way in which people interact with each other, in the language that they use, where language I would always interpret in a very broad sense of many different kinds of semiotic activity. Looking at the detail of how participants in practices make use of the resources that are available to them to achieve things in the world, to account for their world and for their actions and for themselves. And the approach that I use tends also to use to go to the level of actually using tools from linguistics in order to analyse what is happening when people use language. Identity is not actually a concept which I tend to use very frequently. So one of the things I've tried to do is to analyse what that means to me from a discursive point of view. Discourses construct positions for people and ascribe them to individuals. Sometimes what are called roles for participants are made available via discourse. But individuals actually participate in many different discourses. And those different discourses have different sets of resources, different sets of positions available within them, which constrain but don't determine the way in which individuals are positioned. So you can ascribe a role to somebody, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will accept all the details of what is implied by that role. Individuals actually position themselves by making choices between the resources that are available to them. And those choices may be conscious choices, but may also be unconscious choices that they make as they seek to account for their practices. The idea of accounting is one that is used in discursive psychology. For example, Edwards uses this idea of people constructing their identities through the way in which they account for their practices. The accounting has both external and internal aspects. Now this is something which discourse theory tends not to say anything about the internal. And for that, of course, we need to go closer towards other disciplinary resources, as in psychoanalytic, which we're looking at later on today. And I take identity to refer to the way in which individuals account for their practices to other people and to themselves, and the positionings that they adopt within the discourses that are available in given situations that they're in. And to look at an example, rather than thinking about the sort of assessment regimes that Dylan was talking about in terms of formal tests and examinations, I thought that it would be interesting to look at currently fashionable assessment for learning and think about how that affects identities. I'll take an extract from a text from QCA that forms part of the official discourse of assessment currently in this country. I'll allow you to read that. One of the things that I found interesting about this text is some of the tensions that are within it. Tensions for teachers in making sense of what they're supposed to do in their classrooms and what their classrooms are supposed to be like. In that the teacher prescribes the content which is to be learned, but there is at the same time very high value being placed on student independence. And this appears to construct a very positive possible learner identity of sort of good learners who are independent and responsible. But there's also a negative student position constructed by this final sentence, or in this final sentence. And I thought it would be interesting to look in detail at the way in which the language of this sentence actually, the work that the language does in constructing positions for learners and indeed for teachers as well. There are two things that I would like to look at particularly. The first thing is this term, lack of learning. Interesting, grammatically, it's a nominal phrase. By making it nominal, a noun, a thing, an object, it's objectified, it exists. So there is lack of learning. It's not controversial in any way. It exists.